It's almost like we're living in some sort of Hollywood movie from, a DC Comics or something where, you've got Bane out there wreaking havoc in the city, and it's just turning into absolute madness in some areas.
Some guy with a weird accent and a mask hoarding all the toilet paper.
Faith, firearms, and freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 373. Thank you all so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Those of you who are new to the show, welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy the show. Hope you'll check out the huge back catalog, 372 episodes strong. And I hope you'll consider joining the Reformation Gun Club and supporting the show in the future if you would like access to lots of cool exclusive content in addition to the weekly podcast. That is available if you are a member of the Reformation Gun Club. Hundreds of hours of exclusive content, to be more precise. This week, I want to give a quick shout out to the some of the members of the Reformation Gun Club who helped make today's show and all of our shows possible. Gordon Lewis, Jim from Moline, Illinois, Rob from DeKalb, Illinois, Mitch from Stockbridge, Michigan, Ron from Lexington Park, Maryland, Drew from Excelsior Springs, Missouri, Frank from Lake City, Michigan, Catherine from Casper, Wyoming, Paul from Sheridan, Wyoming, and Paul from McKinney, Texas. Thank you all so much for your support. If you would like to find out more about what it means to be a member of the Reformation Gun Club, if you would like to find out about all of the benefits that are available as a member, and if you would like to, have that satisfaction of knowing that you helped make this show possible, check us out at reformationgunclub.com. Look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. And we have an online hangout, by the way, coming up. Let me grab my calendar real quick. If I had been so smart as to do that before the show started, that would have been great. Our online hangout, this is something, by the way, that we do for those of you who don't know, who haven't listened to the show or don't know what I'm talking about here. The Reformation Gun Club, we hang out once a month, and you get exclusive invitations for that, and we're doing that this coming Wednesday, the 30th of August, 2023, at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. And if you join the Reformation Gun Club today, you will get an invitation to come join us for that episode. And we would love to see you and hear from you. We just, it's a good time hanging out with the other members and sort of chewing the fat, sharing with the members just what's going on in our lives, some recommendations for adult beverages. So bring your own bottle and come hang out with us. We'd love to see you. All right, I've been working lately on a sequel for my fantasy novel. You probably didn't know that I had one. It's called The Fifth Command. By the way, shameless plug here, it is available on Amazon. There are still signed copies available. So check that out at armedlutheran.us/books. Anyway, The Fifth Command is a fantasy adventure for young readers and adults. Adults enjoy it too, which follows the exploits of four characters who may or may not be loosely based on the contributors to a really fantastic Lutheran podcast you may have heard of. Anyway, the story is set in this cool fantasy world, and it teaches some important biblical values, the primary of which is the fifth commandment, which of course is you shall not murder, but it also means that you have a responsibility, if you're able, to protect and to defend your neighbor. Again, quick plug. It's available at Amazon and at armedlutheran.us/books. And there's a reading guide available also for parents, has some cool questions and things for discussion so you can talk about the biblical concepts that are present in the book. Anyway, enough of the shameless plug, but I had for some time no idea what I was going to do for an encore for the Fifth Command, or if I would even write one at all. The epilogue to that book sort of sets all the characters in very different roles from where they set out at the end of the book, and I just couldn't come up with a way to get them up and out adventurizing again. Well, a few weeks back, with thanks to the brain-stimulating effects of a nice piping hot cup of coffee and a pipe, I sat down and hammered out an outline for a new story. And I'm not going to give any of it away, except to say that one of the concepts that keeps recurring in the book is that of government authority and our attitudes towards it as Christians. From Romans 13, verse 1, we read, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against God, against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience." And this seems an apropos reading from Scripture, given the state of our nation at the moment, don't you think? We are watching, I think, a government that is absolutely a terror to good works. And we can see that at all levels, federal, state, and local. But let's focus on the federal, shall we? For the moment. We're watching a government, probably the most corrupt president in American history. And I can say that with a clear conscience because it's absolutely true. There's no way you can argue otherwise. And that's saying something given the scandals of past administrations. Joe Biden, his entire career, has done nothing but enrich himself by selling influence, peddling the family name, enriching his family members as well. But that's been his shtick his entire career. I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I think I've made that clear. As I've said, he did good things, many good things as president, but he's also his own worst enemy. And I do despise the way he attacks his fellow Republicans when Joe Biden is really, his administration has been a disaster for the American people. He's a narcissist on steroids, Donald Trump. And yet, while I would choose any of the GOP candidates, except for a couple, over Trump, I can say with a clear conscience that I would vote for Trump in a heartbeat over any Democrat. The way that the left has attacked him over the 4 years of his presidency and even now 3 years after he's been out of office, with bogus political indictments, the hypocrisy on the part of the media, the Democrats, and the so-called Department of Justice, it's a little much. And I have a couple of friends on social media who are soon to be not friends anymore because I get tired of seeing the constant lock him up memes. It's pretty much the only thing that they post on social media, while at the same time saying absolutely nothing about people on the left. It's all Trump derangement syndrome. At the same time that the left and the media, I know that's the same thing, but our so-called Department of Justice is determined to send Trump to prison for 700 years. Remember, this is the same Department of Justice that excused violations by people like Hillary Clinton. You'll remember one of the things that they've tried to pin on Donald Trump was this classified document scandal. He had classified documents or documents that were marked as classified in his home in Florida. Now, that ignores the fact that he as president has the authority to declassify those documents himself. But Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, had no such authority. And she was running, rather than having a pile of documents, a box or two of documents in a closet, she was running an unsecure email server out of a closet in her Washington, D.C. apartment and doing government business on it, business that we now know was exposed to our international enemies. She even tried to delete evidence of this using something called BleachBit. And yet, the Department of Justice excused her and said, well, she didn't do it intentionally. She didn't intend to break the law, so it's okay. But Donald Trump, obviously he intended to break the law, even though the laws that supposedly he's violated are BS. And how do we know that this hypocrisy exists? Well, freaking Joe Biden did exactly the same thing. And he did it as vice president and even as senator. So he had absolutely no authority at all to access those documents outside of a secure location. No authority, especially as senator, to declassify anything. And yet, we're overlooking that as a way and just focusing on Orange Man bad. Joe Biden had classified documents piled in the garage of his home in Delaware. Not exactly a secure location, especially given the fact that every time Joe Biden talks about a disaster that happens around the country, he has to mention the fact that he almost had his home in Delaware burned down, even though that's BS too. But that's a different story. We'll talk about his being a complete and utter, being such a stranger to the truth that it's not even funny. Anyway, but we're going to excuse all of that stuff. We're going to ignore it because Orange Man bad. The Secret Service discovered a freaking bag of cocaine in the White House. And everybody in America with half a brain knows who it belonged to. And yet, the authorities, whose job it is who can find in a speck of blood on a wall, can find the DNA of, and solve crimes with it, has no idea. No idea who that belonged to. And they've said that they may never know, which tells us that they do know. They just don't want to say because it's embarrassing. And at the same time, we have tens of millions of Americans, many of them minorities, sitting in prison right now for drug crimes. But we're never going to find out whose bag of cocaine was sitting in the White House. Joe Biden's son is a crack addict who violated a federal gun law, a violation that would get you or me thrown into prison for 10 years and would prompt the ATF to raid and shut down the FFL that we bought the gun from. But the Department of Justice was in the process of closing a sweetheart deal with Hunter Biden to excuse him not only of the gun crime, but also of further investigation into his tax evasion and foreign influence peddling crimes. And the Department of Justice got caught red-handed trying to do this, and the deal fell through thanks to the judge. But that's a deal that no DA, no law enforcement agency in America would ever give you or me. The Department of Justice is currently suing SpaceX. That's a company owned by Elon Musk. It's a company that builds high-tech rockets for space travel. That's important, sensitive stuff. Why are they being sued? Because they refuse to hire illegal immigrants. Does that seem like a smart thing to do, to hire illegal immigrants to work on highly sensitive, classified, potentially classified technology? Stuff that our global enemies would love to get their hands on? We all know the real reason that they're suing them. It's because the owner of the company, Elon Musk, is critical of government policy. An FBI field office in Virginia circulated a memo calling Catholics violent extremists. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, and the FBI are now being sued for failing to comply with a Freedom of Information Act request related to that memo because they refused to turn it over to people who've requested it. That's a law. They have to do it, and they're dragging their feet on it. The memo identified, quote, radical traditional Catholics as potential, quote, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. According to the complaint, the groups were requesting text and email communications between the Department of Justice and FBI officials that included terms like Catholics, Latin Mass, radical traditional Catholics, Pope Francis, or the Rosary, among others. Merrick Garland, you remember him? The guy that Barack Obama wanted to put on the Supreme Court at the very end of his second term. He's now the Attorney General, as you probably know, and he called the memo appalling during testimony before Congress, but I suspect, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I suspect that he's only appalled that they got caught. Because this is not the first time they've done this. As always, as is the case with all of these scandals with the DOJ and other alphabet agencies, no one involved in writing or circulating the memo has or will be fired. Nobody involved in the Steele dossier and the illegal investigations and wiretapping of President Trump. Nobody involved in going all the way back to Fast and Furious. Nobody lost their jobs. Nobody got fired. Nobody got prosecuted for it. And they won't. A subpoena issued by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan last month confirmed that the FBI attempted to cultivate sources to combat domestic terrorism and to use local religious organizations as avenues for tripwire and source development, quote unquote. Subpoenaed documents revealed that the FBI relied on at least one undercover agent to produce its analysis, and that the FBI proposed that its agents engage in outreach to Catholic parishes to develop sources among the clergy and church leadership to inform on Americans who are practicing their faith. So the FBI is doing sweet FA to fight the fentanyl problem or drug cartels or human trafficking at the border, but they're sending agents into churches to try to cultivate sources to spy on Catholics. And if you think they're only doing it to Catholics, I think I've got a bridge to sell you. And the left wonders why we have so little trust for the government and authority in this country. This is the same Department of Justice. As I mentioned again before, they've done this before. Remember when they called parents violent extremists for daring to show up to school board meetings and complain about sexually explicit material and LGBTQ bathroom policies? They even established a task force to investigate them after heated debates between concerned parents and pedophile-protecting school boards began making news, most notably in Loudoun, Virginia, where the school board covered up the rape of a student in one of their school bathrooms. Everywhere citizens complain or push back against government policy, the government seeks to silence and harass those citizens. The Biden administration was caught contacting social media companies in an attempt to get those companies to censor speech. And despite a court order to cease and desist, the administration has said it's going to continue with that outreach. There's again a rumbling about mask mandates and the rise of a new COVID variant, that we may need to do something about it just in time for election season. What a coincidence. Just in time for cities and states to do what they did last time and change their rules about elections to make sure that old man Biden doesn't lose in 24. Now, mind you, COVID is not and never was bad enough to close the border or to stop Black Lives Matter's fiery but peaceful protests. So that should tell you all you need to know about COVID in the future. Now, where, after all this ranting, does Romans 13 come in? It says authorities are God's servants for your good. But I think we can safely say that this isn't a free republic any longer. We live in an autocratic system where the power of government agency is being wielded against political enemies and just common everyday citizens instead of doing what's right, instead of working for our good. We live in a society that attempts to silence and intimidate the voices of the church. We live in a society that sees nothing wrong with teaching your 5-year-old about anal sex. We live in a society that sees nothing wrong with having toddlers slip dollar bills into the thongs of men dressed as women. We see nothing wrong with all the violence and the crime that we see in the streets. But we do see something wrong with your religious beliefs. We do see something wrong when you speak out at a school board meeting. They see nothing wrong with violent leftist protests, but they do see something wrong with you gathering together in worship. They see nothing wrong with depriving your right to bear arms, but they'll send billions of dollars overseas to fund a war in Ukraine and are doing nothing to fight rampant crime in our cities. Authorities are God's servant for your good. But what if they aren't acting for your good anymore? What if they are acting in ways that are harmful, corrupt, immoral, violating God's law? In that case, we as Christians have absolutely no obligation to comply. Hold them accountable every chance you have to go to the ballot box. If you don't like the law, if you don't like the policies, if you're not happy with the way your government is working, go to the ballot box and make sure that you vote these people out. Speak up whenever and wherever you can. Do not comply. That's what's been on my mind this week. If you have any thoughts or any comments or any questions, please visit the feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. I would love to hear your comments or your thoughts on these issues. Be sure to tune in next week. Next week will be our online hangout for August. I know it's going to be airing on Labor Day weekend. Apologies for the congestion. Allergies are horrible this time of year, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed. Next weekend is the first episode of September. We're going to be airing the audio from the online hangout for August, which will be taking place this coming Wednesday. the 30th at 8:30 Central Time. If you are not a member of the Gun Club, would like to come and join us, please visit armedlutheran.us/gun club or reformationgunclub.com and join today. We would love to have you come and join us. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.